For decades, a single envelope lay untouched in the royal archives, sealed under direct order from Prince Philip himself. Now, in a shocking twist, its contents have been exposed, and what they reveal could alter the balance of power inside Buckingham Palace forever. The Duke of Edinburgh, long thought to have remained publicly neutral between royal factions, left behind one final command, and it targets two women at the heart of the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The letter was found buried beneath other estate documents, marked only with the Duke's distinctive seal and a handwritten instruction, to be opened upon my passing, in presence of the keeper and one blood heir. Few within the inner court even knew such a letter existed, fewer still were prepared for what it contained. What began as a routine archival review suddenly exploded into a royal reckoning. Philip's bold declaration was crystal clear. His personal fortune, accumulated quietly and independently of crown accounts, was to be entrusted to Catherine, Princess of Wales, and explicitly not to Camilla, Queen Consort. According to those present during the unsealing, the room fell into stunned silence. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on anyone. This wasn't just a financial decision, it was a declaration of allegiance. Philip, often painted as a stern traditionalist, had chosen to tether his legacy not to the current queen, but to his granddaughter-in-law, and the wording left no room for ambiguity. He wrote of Catherine's unshakable devotion to duty, contrasting it sharply with what he called conflicted motivations, threatening the clarity of the crown. The implications rippled instantly through the royal corridors. At Clarence House, where Charles and Camilla had assumed an unspoken permanence of influence, panic took hold. Advisors scrambled to verify the document's authenticity, though it was confirmed beyond question by the royal archivist and two legal witnesses. It was no forgery, no tabloid rumour. It was Philip's unmistakable handwriting, sharp, deliberate, final. Behind closed doors, senior courtiers debated whether the letter could be suppressed. There were whispered efforts to quietly file it away, to minimize its relevance. But those efforts were blocked by a rare internal override from the keeper of the Privy Seal, who insisted that Philip's final directive be honored and logged. One official later confessed anonymously that the letter was a political earthquake in royal disguise. And then came the most haunting revelation of all. It is now believed that Queen Elizabeth knew about the letter. According to leaked diary entries by one of her former ladies-in-waiting, the late Queen had been shown the sealed document weeks before Philip's death. She had read it, she had wept, and she had said nothing. Whether out of respect for her husband's wishes or fear of palace division, she kept the truth buried until now. But to understand why Prince Philip would take such a personal and political stand, we must first revisit the deep fractures he witnessed inside the royal family during his final years. Behind the public smiles and ceremonial bows, Prince Philip saw something few dared acknowledge: a monarchy at war with itself. In the last years of his life, the Duke quietly watched the rise of two contrasting visions for the crown, one rooted in duty, the other in disruption. And his growing concern wasn't just about tradition, it was about survival. What unsettled Philip most wasn't the scandalous headlines or relentless speculation, it was what he saw behind closed doors. As the generational power shift loomed, so did the deepening divide between two rising camps, William and Catherine on one side, embodying restraint and responsibility, Charles and Camilla on the other, projecting reform, but stirring unease. Philip, ever the strategist, recognized the danger of this dual monarchy in waiting. In confidential sessions with senior aides, he voiced fears not of change itself, but of confusion, two futures, pulling in opposite directions, threatening the crown's singular identity. According to multiple insiders, Philip grew especially alarmed by Camilla's increasing sway over both public optics and private decision-making. He was no stranger to influence behind thrones. He had played that role himself for over 7 decades. But what disturbed him was how Camilla's influence seemed to shift priorities away from the institution and toward persona. His concern wasn't personal, it was institutional. A monarchy built on mystique and unity, he believed, could not survive blurred allegiances and diluted purpose. In one documented conversation with a senior courtier, Philip reportedly warned that if you allow parallel lines of power, the crown loses its centre. At the same time, Philip's respect for Catherine had become quietly profound. He saw in her the unflinching discipline he once demanded of younger royals, the ability to endure scrutiny without scandal, to project stability without spectacle. To him, Catherine represented what the monarchy needed most: constancy. While others indulged in image battles, she stood still, and that stillness, in Philip's eyes, was strength. According to a footman who served during his final year at Windsor, the Duke once referred to Catherine as the monarchy's spine, even if no one's noticed yet. His concerns extended far beyond gossip. During late-night calls to Windsor, Philip raised alarms about succession vulnerabilities. With Charles approaching the throne, the Duke feared that unresolved public skepticism over Camilla's role could destabilize everything they had worked to protect. What if public trust continued to erode? What if internal factions turned into open disloyalty? For a man who had watched monarchies collapse across Europe in the last century, these weren't idle questions. They were warnings. And yet, even Philip's immense foresight couldn't shield the palace from the battle that erupted once the letter's existence was confirmed. When Princess Catherine was summoned to a private meeting at Windsor, she expected another briefing. What she received instead was an envelope, a legacy, and a decision that could split the firm. But behind her composed demeanor, those close to her say something changed. This wasn't just about money. This was about power, about loyalty, and about betrayal. The letter was read aloud to her in a room lined with centuries of royal expectation. The seal had already been broken. The words were unmistakably his. Prince Philip had named her not the Queen Consort, not one of his own children, as the steward of his personal fortune. A fortune he had quietly curated through trusts, investments, and foreign accounts entirely separate from the sovereign estate. The gravity of it left Catherine momentarily silent. But it wasn't the wealth that shook her. It was the weight of trust. It was the realization that the man who had never publicly chosen sides had just declared one, with her name underlined in history's ink. Alone later in her Kensington study, she reportedly reread the letter 3 times. Sources say she didn't speak for hours. Her inner circle, long trained to read her silences, described her as stricken, but not uncertain. The implications were clear. To act on Philip's wishes would be to defy Camilla and perhaps Charles himself. To ignore the directive would be to betray the man who had, in his final written act, chosen her to carry his legacy forward. This was no mere inheritance. It was a summons. William's reaction, according to palace aides, was far more fraught. Trapped between a father who had only just claimed the throne and a wife suddenly thrust into a high-stakes proxy war, the Prince of Wales reportedly grew tense and uncharacteristically short-tempered. He was heard pacing through Windsor's East Gallery, muttering, he knew exactly what this would do. In a family that measures loyalty in whispers and glances, this letter was a thunderclap. Catherine, meanwhile, turned quietly to one of the few figures she could trust without hesitation, Princess Anne. Rumours swirl that a discreet meeting took place between the two women in the private gardens at Sandringham. Anne, known for her loyalty to both her father and the monarchy's survival, allegedly advised Catherine to do what he asked, but do it in your way. That advice may have been the stabilizing force Catherine needed. What followed was telling. Catherine did not issue any public statement. She did not engage the press. But what she did do sent a clearer signal. She cut all direct communication with Camilla. Not a word, not a message, not a glance. For a family so dependent on silent diplomacy, this was a rebuke louder than scandal. And as the days passed, courtiers began to notice something else. Catherine's influence was quietly expanding. Briefings were rerouted. Patronage updates came directly through her private secretary. Invitations to certain high-level engagements were addressed to her first. The balance of power wasn't shifting with loud declarations. It was slipping subtly, deliberately, and unmistakably in her direction. But while Catherine contemplated her next move, Camilla was already demanding answers and retaliation. Queen Consort Camilla was never meant to be sidelined, and when the letter was read aloud during a confidential Privy Council review, her fury was immediate. Those in the room described her reaction as explosive, and what followed was a series of quiet but ruthless moves meant to neutralize the threat Catherine now represented. Within hours of the revelation, Camilla summoned King Charles for a private confrontation. What began as a tense discussion reportedly escalated into veiled ultimatums. Palace insiders claimed she threatened to withdraw from public duties entirely unless the matter was contained and contextualized before the press got wind of it. Her fury wasn't merely personal, it was strategic. The letter had struck at the core of her authority, and worse, it cast a long shadow over her legitimacy. For Camilla, this wasn't just about inheritance, it was about identity. About being acknowledged not just as Charles's wife, but as a rightful matriarch of the monarchy. Almost immediately, Clarence House operatives began working behind the scenes to downplay the letter's relevance. Carefully crafted statements were drafted, suggesting the document reflected personal sentiments, not legal directives. Select briefings were leaked to friendly journalists, hinting that Prince Philip had written many private notes in his final months. This one, they suggested, might have been just another unfiled musing. But the damage had already been done. The letter wasn't hearsay. It had been signed, witnessed, and logged into the royal archives. While that effort stalled, Camilla turned inward, reinforcing her own position among the palace's most powerful allies, most notably the Protocol Clarion, a long-standing advisory circle that specializes in constitutional precedents and ceremonial authority. The group convened for a private strategy session at Highgrove, where Camilla allegedly demanded a complete audit of all shared royal patronages and initiatives where Catherine held influence. The goal was clear: recalibrate power, retrench influence, reassert control. Soon after, subtle but deliberate changes began to emerge. Two charities long linked to Prince Philip were suddenly redirected under Camilla's purview. An educational initiative, once fronted by Catherine, was paused for structural review. Then came the most audacious maneuver yet. Camilla began laying groundwork to fast-track her son, Tom Parker Bowles, into a formal palace role under the guise of public outreach and modernization. It was a direct signal this legacy would not bypass her family without a fight. But even that wasn't the end. Reports soon surfaced that the keeper of the archives, the very figure who had authorized the release of Philip's letter, was being quietly pressured. According to one source, a high-level phone call from Camilla's office raised concerns about security breaches and internal loyalty, language many interpreted as an unmistakable warning. The keeper, a long-time loyalist of both the late Queen and Prince Philip, refused to comply. But the message had been sent. Yet even as Camilla circled her wagons, another faction within the palace began to quietly gather around the very woman Philip had chosen. Not all within the palace supported Camilla's retaliation. In hushed meetings and coded messages, a powerful new alliance began to form, dubbed by insiders as the Inner Four. Their mission: protect Catherine, honor Philip's final directive, and ensure the monarchy's survival does not rest in Camilla's hands. The Inner Four didn't appear overnight. They emerged from a quiet convergence of loyalty, legacy, and deep-seated conviction. Princess Anne, the steadfast daughter who had always understood the weight of royal responsibility. Duchess Sophie, whose quiet diplomacy had earned her trust across all factions. Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary who, despite his role, had never hidden his unease with Camilla's expanding influence. And Lord Fellows, a legal mind so entwined with royal protocols that some called him the living archive. Together, these four formed a silent bulwark against what they saw as a dangerous deviation from the monarchy's true course. Their first meeting was held under the radar at Sandringham, reportedly arranged through Anne's personal network. It was there that the legacy directive was dissected: Philip's letter, its legal standing, its implications, and its message. According to a leak from a household staffer, the tone was urgent, the mood defiant. One phrase from the meeting was recorded in a discarded memo later recovered by aides. "This is not rebellion. This is preservation." Lord Fellows was the first to raise concerns about the estate's structure. If Philip's private wealth was to be transitioned to Catherine, there needed to be an airtight legal framework. Sir Clive confirmed that prior to his passing, Philip had begun reshaping certain holdings, investments, and offshore trusts that were distinct from Crown assets, precisely for this purpose. It wasn't just emotional, it was methodical. Then came a chilling revelation. Buried deep within the estate documentation was a secondary codicil, rarely mentioned and even more rarely understood. It referenced the appointment of an unshakable moral steward, a phrase never used in any previous royal directive. The Inner Four interpreted this as a coded endorsement of Catherine not just for the inheritance, but for something larger, a symbolic passing of torch, a safeguard for the Crown's moral continuity. Speculation within the group intensified when Princess Anne allegedly revealed that she had delivered Philip's original letter to Catherine. This quiet admission, if true, reframed everything. It meant Anne had known. It meant the plan was older, deeper, and more calculated than anyone imagined. It also meant Anne's role wasn't passive. She was the courier of her father's final will and, in many ways, its executor. Meanwhile, another force within the palace, the so-called Clarion Ring, composed of Camilla-aligned loyalists and long-serving traditionalists, had begun tracking the Inner Four's meetings. Tensions simmered. The palace felt increasingly like a chessboard, with each side maneuvering quietly but deliberately. The Queen Consort's team moved to intercept communications. The Inner Four became even more discreet, using intermediaries, handwritten notes, and in some cases, proxy advisors, to shield their strategy. But the letter wasn't the only document Philip left behind, and what emerged next cast an even darker shadow over Charles's reign. For decades, whispers surrounded a rumoured clause buried deep within Philip's personal directives, a clause known cryptically as the Sunset Provision. When a sealed annex was discovered in his Geneva lockbox, everything changed. It wasn't just about fortune, it was about ending something, or someone. The document was encrypted, bound in legal protections that stretched across borders, languages, and jurisdictions. Only 2 people were listed as authorized to access its contents: Philip's longtime solicitor, Edward Lazenby, and Princess Anne. And when it was finally opened beneath the stone silence of a Geneva vault, the truth surged like a tidal wave back toward Buckingham. The annex, formerly titled Codicil 4B, contained instructions of staggering finality. In it, Philip declared that no assets, whether material, symbolic, or institutional, may pass to or through a consort lacking sovereign lineage. In effect, it rendered Camilla, and any descendant or dependent of hers, entirely excluded from claim not just to his personal fortune, but to any structure or legacy bearing his name. It was a full and deliberate severance. The language was chilling in its clarity. The Sunset Clause, as his legal team later confirmed, was inserted as a failsafe against what Philip described as the misdirection of institutional equity toward parties unbound by royal succession. He framed it not as a personal rebuke, but as an act of constitutional preservation. But within palace walls, no one doubted the subtext. Camilla had been written out formally, legally, and irrevocably. The reaction was instantaneous. Charles's legal advisory team was thrown into panic. The codicil's legality, notarized in Switzerland, meant that UK estate law had no jurisdiction to contest it. There would be no quiet amendments, no behind-the-scenes rewording. Worse, the clause was airtight. Any attempt to circumvent it would trigger a reversion clause that would send the estate's entirety to an external, undisclosed trust. If Charles moved against it, the whole fortune estimated in the tens of millions would disappear from the Crown's reach altogether. Inside Clarence House, the mood reportedly turned frantic. Meetings were convened, legal experts brought in. The language, however, remained immovable. One advisor allegedly remarked, Philip planned this with the precision of a general. He left no door unlocked. But perhaps the most damning question was, who else knew? Eyes turned, once again, to Princess Anne. Speculation mounted that Anne had long been aware of the codicil's existence. If she had withheld its disclosure, it was not out of malice but out of strategy. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the palace to fracture just enough that the clause would land not as a disruption but as a reckoning. She refused to confirm or deny her involvement, maintaining a silence that spoke volumes. For those watching, one thing became increasingly clear. This wasn't just a final letter from a royal patriarch. This was a time-locked detonation. Now, all eyes turned to Charles. How would a monarch balance his love, his legacy, and his late father's final demand? King Charles has weathered scandals, scrutiny, and scorn. But nothing prepared him for the torment of this moment. With the memory of his father looming and the threat of rebellion within the palace, Charles was forced to choose loyalty to his wife or the dying wish of the man who made him king. Balmoral, once a refuge for contemplation, had turned into a silent battlefield. According to sources close to the royal staff, Charles retreated there alone after receiving confirmation of the sunset provision. Witnesses described him as haunted, pacing the halls at night, torn between love and legacy. His emotional state deteriorated so visibly that a senior aide summoned the Archbishop of Canterbury for counsel. For the king, this was no longer about legalities, it was about identity. Could he truly defend Camilla's place beside him, while directly violating the wishes of the father who had, in life and death, never wavered in protecting the institution? The pressure was unbearable. On one side, Camilla's fury had hardened into ultimatums. Her demand was simple: defend her publicly, or risk losing her privately. On the other, Catherine's silence had become a thunderous symbol of dignity, echoing across the kingdom. She hadn't demanded anything. She didn't need to. The nation saw the contrast, and it was beginning to draw its own conclusions. Charles found himself cornered by two women embodying opposite forces. One driven by emotional urgency, the other by institutional gravity. And neither would yield. Prince William's intervention added a new layer to the crisis. Reportedly, he confronted his father in a private room at Windsor, where the conversation turned from polite to painful. William pleaded with Charles not to make the monarchy a casualty of personal conflict. He warned that public trust was slipping, and the firm could not afford to become a house divided. The future, William said, would not forgive cowardice masquerading as compromise. But behind every word, behind every clash, was the ever-watchful presence of Princess Anne. She did not interfere. She did not advise. But her silence, her unwavering resolve, loomed like a moral compass Charles could not ignore. She had executed their father's instructions with clarity and composure, and in doing so she forced her brother to confront the one thing he had always feared most, his own indecision. Then came the moment that changed everything. Charles requested a private audience with Catherine. No aides, no protocol. What was said between them remains sealed, buried in silence that neither party has since broken. But what followed was telling. Catherine emerged, composed, her eyes clear, her pace unshaken. For the first time in weeks, Charles was seen later that evening, not pacing but seated in stillness, as if some final verdict had been reached inside him. Yet, even as tensions reached their zenith, a final twist ensured the conflict would not go quietly into royal history. In a move that shocked even her closest allies, Catherine made her countermove not in anger, but with precision. A new foundation, a symbolic pledge, and one quietly devastating transfer of power. Prince Philip's legacy would be protected, but in a way no one anticipated. She didn't hold a press conference. There were no grand proclamations. But early one morning, the Royal Communications Office released a quiet statement announcing the creation of the Philip Stewardship Trust, a private, independent body designed to uphold the values Prince Philip had spent his life defending: service, duty, and quiet resilience. The trust, crucially, would not be governed by Buckingham Palace. It would answer to the public and be legally autonomous. In essence, Catherine had just moved Philip's legacy beyond the monarchy's direct reach and closer to the people he had so often claimed were the only reason the monarchy mattered at all. Observers were stunned. Royal aides scrambled to understand the implications. The legal team, who once agonized over the sunset clause, now found themselves boxed out entirely. Catherine, in one carefully crafted stroke, had accepted the responsibility of Philip's wishes without appearing to claim the spoils. She refused to inherit the fortune directly. Instead, she appointed a circle of trustees figures known for their independence, integrity, and, most crucially, their loyalty to her. In doing so, she denied Camilla any access, not through confrontation, but through structure. But the message didn't stop with bank accounts or titles. Catherine reallocated several of Prince Philip's most beloved patronages. The Duke's military affiliations, his environmental projects, and even the famed Duke of Edinburgh awards were redistributed not to the traditional senior royals, but to the next generation: Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Lady Louise. It was a silent succession plan, bypassing debate and emotion in favour of legacy-building action. Catherine wasn't claiming Philip's memory, she was planting it in the future. The public response was seismic. Approval ratings for Catherine soared to historic highs. Editorials described her as the Crown's conscience, and social media erupted in what commentators dubbed the quiet coronation. Meanwhile, Camilla's image, already fragile in the aftermath of the letter, suffered a brutal dip. Analysts noted that for the first time in years, Camilla had become an emblem of division, while Catherine now embodied continuity. And then came the moment that silenced any lingering doubt. In an unreleased segment of a BBC archival documentary, footage surfaced of Prince Philip, seated beside Queen Elizabeth, speaking candidly about the younger royals. When asked who he believed truly understood duty, he paused, smiled slightly, and said, "Catherine. She's the one. She knows when to speak and when to let the moment speak for her." The footage had been held back for years. Now, it played on screens across the world. Buckingham Palace, cornered by both legal precision and public sentiment, issued a short statement. It formally acknowledged Catherine as the steward of the Duke's private charitable intentions. No ceremony needed. The Queen Consort was silent. King Charles, according to aides, made no objection. But even as peace seems to settle over the palace, the final whisper of Philip's intent emerges from one unexpected voice. It was during a quiet public engagement in Wales that a young Prince George, asked innocently about the future, gave an answer that left the press speechless. His words, simple, unprompted, and eerily direct, echoed the legacy of a man he barely knew. But the meaning? A promise, or a warning. As he stood next to his mother, surrounded by schoolchildren and reporters, George was asked what he wanted to be when he grew up. He paused, smiled faintly, and said, "I'll do what great-grandpa asked. I'll take care of it." The moment was captured, broadcast, and within hours it had gone viral. The quote was cryptic, hauntingly mature, and instantly linked to the storm that had gripped the monarchy months earlier. Was it rehearsed? A coincidence? Or had the youngest heir already been drawn into the shadows of a legacy written before his birth? Royal aides immediately scrambled to contain the fallout. Press officers framed it as a child's whimsical response, a sweet nod to family history. Inside palace corridors, whispers suggested that George, at just 12 years old, had already been quietly briefed on the letter. Not in full, perhaps, but enough to understand that his great-grandfather had entrusted something rare and irreversible to his mother. And one day, to him. Sources close to Catherine claim she had begun, with great caution, introducing George to Philip's life not through formal briefings, but through storytelling, guided lessons, and quiet afternoons with her private tutor. The tutor, it said, was carefully selected for his knowledge of royal lineage, political philosophy, and historical precedents. George wasn't being raised to simply be king. He was being raised to understand the difference between holding the crown and earning it. Then came the rumour that gripped royal watchers, the Philip Archive, the sealed collection of the Duke's private journals, letters, and correspondences may not have been destroyed or absorbed by the crown as previously thought. It may have been set aside, protected, waiting, and destined ultimately for George. If true, it would mean that Philip's voice, his principles, and his warnings were not just echoes of the past, but instruments of the future. The question now looms larger than ever. Has Prince Philip's hand reached further than any expected, not just to shape the present monarchy, but to forge its next sovereign from the quiet shadows of legacy and foresight? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: the path that began with a sealed letter may now be leading directly into the heart of a new royal age. And so, the letter that once lay sealed in silence now echoes through corridors of power, generations deep, its consequences only beginning. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.